Good morning. Just to say up front, I'm probably the odd one out here. I'm probably the least technological person in the building. So, for example, when I hear the word cloud, this is the thing that I actually reach for. So, yes, what I want to do, hopefully, is talk a little bit about something that I do know about. So I may not be, as I say, technologically fluent, but I know about communication. I know about how to get people to talk to you, to listen to you, to buy into your brand. Effectively, how to get human beings to actually emotionally engage with what you're trying to sell. So for me, storytelling is the missing link. And I'm doing something again at 3:30, a little bit more of a workshop. It's going to be interesting. It'll be the first time I've ever competed with a race course. But I want to talk to you a little bit now about actually what do I mean about storytelling and why is it so important in creating a strategy for technology. Because the theme is about convergence, and I want to give you my own sense of what that convergence might be. Just a little bit about who I am. One of the things I need to say, I'm a lapsed classicist, studied Latin, Greek, ancient history, so for most of you, this is actually who I don't think is Homer and Virgil. I then went into advertising, and that's pretty much where I got my sort of immersion into understanding how human beings make choices, how they react to brands and communication. I think you've got some copies of the book for the workshop, which I think I've got 10 to give away. Book of the year, runner-up last year. Probably my epitaph, because this is Foyle's last year, probably my epitaph will be that I was 3 books away from Vince Cable. Let me just give you a start for where I want to actually take this idea, really. I am interested in science, I'm interested in the future, and Ray Kurzweil talks about the singularity, the idea that at some point man and machine consciousness is going to merge. We're going to end up in some sort of hybrid, slightly strange science fiction universe. And I know we're talking to people here who are experts in automation, machine learning, but I do find this fascinating. Equally, I'm hoping most of you have read Yuval Noah Harari's books, both Sapiens and Homo Deus. If not, I recommend them. Very, very smart guy. And his concern as a historian, as a thinker, is what happens. We already know that Google and the quantified self movement means that actually machines know us better than we know ourselves. But also what he speculates is what's going to happen, what's the value of humanity when, as he says, intelligence is decoupled from consciousness. In other words, machines develop a certain type of intelligence which is actually superior to what we, as creatures of flesh and blood, can create. So what does this mean for human beings? What do we bring in this world? The answer is emotion, empathy, and storytelling. And that's going to be the theme of my next sort of half an hour. Again, I'm sure some of you have watched some of these programs or films. I help run a cinema in North London called the Phoenix Cinema, so I'm a big film buff. Please go and see Ex Machina, and I'm sure you've watched Westworld and Humans. All grappling with this idea of what's it going to be in the future? What's it going to be like when, as I say, sort of the human and machine consciousness merge? I do like a good word. I mentioned I'm a classicist. The Greek word arithmos means number. I think we're living in what I call an arithmocracy, a system which is becoming obsessed with numbers and measurement and metrics. With apologies to Freud, I think we suffer from physics envy. We all really want people to act as if they're atoms. The idea of an atom is they're all pretty much the same, and if you know where it starts, you know what pressure to apply to it, you can pretty much estimate where it will end up. Human beings are not like that. But we like to think that, and I think technology sometimes exacerbates that problem. We like to take safety in numbers. Again, I've seen so many different comments and statements here today. I want to talk to you about the other side of that, not just numbers, but emotions and feelings, because that's actually what drives human beings. With apologies for any fans of Grace Jones in the room, I think we're becoming slaves to the algorithm. Again, we know that we're giving all our data up. I'm not going to talk about privacy and ethics. But again, we have to understand what does it mean as human beings if we do that. And I think this leads, if we're not careful, to a sort of arid reductionism, reducing everything just to sort of lowest common denominator, facts, statements, and messages. And as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this. I think this is part of the picture, but I don't want to think that it's all the picture. I don't want us to become slaves to the technology. So I've got 3 areas I want to talk about. Magic number 3 in storytelling. We don't know why. There is something magic about 3. beginning, middle, and end, Veni, Vidi, Vici, etc. 3 points. Firstly, it's brands, not products, that differentiate. All of you in this room, in some way or other, are in the differentiation business. It's important that we differentiate our product, our brand, our service. But brands are different from products because they rely, as human beings do, on emotion. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something called behavioural economics, which is the study of the importance of emotion on human decision-making. And then finally, I want to talk to you specifically about storytelling and how storytelling does transform emotion into action. And I'll give you some more specific tips this afternoon at 3:30 if you're not at the racecourse. And then I'll end up with what I think is the grand universal theory of what I'm talking about, the new convergence. So, part one, what do I mean by brands and why is it different? Why are brands different from products? Again, I don't want to get too sort of semantic with you, but what is a brand? A brand for me does all of these things. A brand is actually rooted in an emotion, one of the big 6 human emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust, since you ask. A brand is also an idea. It's not just a fact. It's not just a piece of information that you're translating to a group of people. It has to be rooted in an idea. It can be part of a customer experience, but it's also, and I quite like this definition as well, a brand is really about owning a space or a territory in people's brains. That's where brands live, up here. They're intangible. They evolve. They are sort of, in a sense, quite hard to grasp, but they are different from a product. Product is just a list of benefits. I'm hoping that everyone in this room knows what I mean by this, but again, sometimes I don't see it in action. Take, for example, this product. It's just some extruded plastic shapes. But it's also one of the most exciting, most versatile, most playful brands that you'll ever see. And of course now, it's a movie franchise. Go figure. But also, my background in communication and brands, these are 2 really important implications. We know, whatever the figure is, let's say it's 80%, huge amounts of products fail. Huge amounts of advertising campaigns or campaigns of any nature fail to address, fail to engage, fail to have an emotional anchor. Why is that? It's because too often we mistake these product benefits and messages and information for deep, emotional storytelling truths. Because, as I've said, a brand does nothing if it doesn't appeal to emotion. So there's some things we have to distinguish here. It's not about what you do, it's about what they want. And again, I'll say it now, it doesn't matter if we're thinking about business to business, business to consumer, whatever you want to call it, peer to peer. It's human to human. Equally, it's not about what you say, it's about how they feel. Yes, you need to have some sort of rational benefits. Yes, you need to have some facts. Nate Silver, who's a great writer and thinker and statistician, talks about the difference between the signal and the noise. Too much of what we create is noise. We're not very good sometimes at isolating and identifying, understanding what is genuinely the signal. And again, just to reinforce the point again from a couple of slides ago, the distinction is always between the product and the emotional appeal. And yes, cards on the table, it's the emotional appeal, I think, that will always trump. Sorry, shouldn't use that word. Always overcome the product benefits. Why? Because in terms of understanding brands and emotions, human beings, by and large, are loyal to people, rather than being loyal to things and products. Yes, we may love our technology, we may love our phones, our apps, but the more we anthropomorphize, the more we try and create things that are genuinely human, human-related, feel like they're actually rooted in human values and characters, the more we're likely to create an enduring, abiding loyalty. Let me give you a little bit of this behavioural economics stuff, which I hope you find fascinating, because I've got a lot more to talk about it, late this afternoon or afterwards if you want to. Why is emotion so important? Not just to brands, but to us. Because for me, that gets us to the necessary stage that builds the bridge towards storytelling. Why? Because human beings, we always have to remember are the products of these three things: biology, our innate biology that makes us who we are, the psychology that helps drive our decision-making, and the culture in which we find ourselves. We are not, and I'll say this again, the products of physics, mathematics, and engineering. However much perhaps some people in this room might like to think that. Ooh, might have offended people there. But that's the thing we need. And biology is very different. In biology, as someone once said, 1 and 1 is 35. Biology is about evolution. It's about surprise. It's about innovation and unpredictability. Physics, mathematics, and engineering, as I mentioned before, tend to want to make things homogeneous and convenient and static. Introduce you to this guy, a man called William James, who was a famous psychologist. He wrote a book called The Principles of Psychology in the 19th century. Any students of English literature might also know his brother, Henry James, who wrote, for example, the book Wings of a Dove. William James was often known as the father of psychology, which makes Henry James the uncle of psychology. But let me just tell you a bit about William James, the father of psychology. And these are some of the books in what's called behavioural economics. You might have heard of Nudge, you might have heard of Daniel Kahneman. Both Richard Thaler, who co-wrote Nudge, and Daniel Kahneman have both won Nobel Prizes now for psychology and economics. So this is the stuff that is becoming interesting now and understanding how human beings make decisions. I can't get you to actually read all those books now, or I can't give you a summation of it, but let me give you perhaps 5 points that will maybe save you some money and you can spend it on a book, for example, mine. The first one, and it's not my saying, wish I come up with this, we don't think the way we think we think. We like to think as human beings that we're very rational, we're very conscious, that all our decisions are made based on facts and information and considered thinking. It's not the case. All the neuroscience is very clear. That's all post-rationalized. It's all largely nonsense, to use a technical term. Emotion trumps, said it again, emotion trumps information. Emotion is what creates our memories. Think about all the memories you have of when you were young. They're almost all rooted in one of the big emotions. What made you happy? What made you sad? What made you afraid? What made you angry? So again, if we're trying to create brands, we're trying to create messages, we need to create emotions that will become transformed into memories. Our brain is not a computer or a sponge. Again, if you want to argue with me now, you'll be wrong, but you can argue with me now or later. It's a misleading metaphor. The brain is sometimes described, I think much more accurately, as an ignoring machine. I love that. I'm going to wait just to see if, it's an ignoring machine. The brain wants things that are efficient and effortless, which is why very often it will make decisions that are easy and effortless and convenient rather than the best decision. Surprise is one of the key 6 emotions and is there to warn us of what's going to be in our interests, in evolutionary interests, what's going to help us survive and help us thrive. So anything that is surprising will cut through. I think our industry, and I don't just mean this group of people here, but generally in the communications world, we hugely underestimate the importance of surprise. We're constantly telling people what they know. We're constantly using conventions and assumptions about products and brands and marketing, which everyone else is using. In that case, the ignoring machine cuts in and says, nope, seen that, not interested. And it's emotion that forges empathy. And the single biggest thing that we have as human beings that machines don't yet have, and I say don't yet have, is empathy. So 5 very important lessons about how human beings choose, how they think, how decision-making, judgments, and perception operate. You might have heard of System 1 and System 2. That's a very simple way of looking at what behavioural economics also tells us. That we like to think that we're in control, that we're the pilot of our own destiny. We're in control of everything that we do. This is System 2, the rational part. And it's the bit that's thinking about me now, hopefully listening to me now. But the thing that surprises us all is that that isn't in control. It thinks it's in control, but actually the autopilot System 1, the unconscious, adaptive, intuitive system, is actually in control and makes us who we are and makes us do what we do. And if that doesn't make you feel slightly scared, there's something wrong with you, because that is the case. And that's where all the decisions lie, and that's where so much of our communication should be addressed, to the unconscious, the implicit, the home of the emotions, System 1. So I've talked about what brands are. I've talked about how emotions work with brands and for human beings. So let me get to the nub of it. Let me get to the third section and talk about what it is about storytelling. And as I say, there's some more tips, specific tips about how to use it this afternoon. This originally started off as a typo. I'm a great believer in serendipity, in falling on things by accident. And this was literally just a very humble typo. But now I've slightly fallen in love with it, really. Attention spam. I think too much of what we create as communication, too much of what we try and tell people, we think is going into their attention inbox, but it's actually going into their attention spam. Yeah? Think about that, because I guarantee whatever communications you've created, produced, brochures, information, stands, whatever, a lot of stuff is going into people's attention spam. Again, if the brain is an ignoring machine, this is one of the things that falls out of that particular metaphor. I also like this. I do like a good bit of wordplay, a good slogan. And this is the first part of my two-line sort of slogan. Numbers numb us. Yes, understand the power of numbers. Again, this was Pythagoras, going back to my Greek history. Pythagoras said numbers are gods. And he's right. In lots of ways, the world is built on numbers. The universe, music are all built on numbers. But human beings do not work on numbers alone. We work on emotions. So we have to be careful that we're not numbing people, sending them stuff that goes into attention spam, simply because it's a complete list, a litany of facts, of data, of information. So when I'm working with research companies, I do an awful lot with research companies to help them tell their stories. I say, let's avoid what I call the data freighter. Here it comes, it's heaving into play, it's coming now, it's the data freighter. And suddenly the brain switches off and starts thinking about what's for dinner, or whether Mourinho is actually going to leave Man United to go to PSG. It's the difference in one way between knowledge and wisdom, and I quite like this definition. We have plenty of knowledge, but wisdom, insight, is something else. You know, knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. And for me, that's part of the difference. And again, that's probably a machine learning thing as well. And I have another acronym for this. I think we're living in a world that's increasingly data-rich, insight-poor. One of my hats, one of my lanyards really, is actually I work in what I call incitement. I try and create insight for brands. An insight is something surprising. An insight is something unusual. An insight is a universal truth that you can turn your brand or use to turn your brand into something that will be genuinely disruptive and innovative. And for me, we're too obsessed with data and information, and we're not looking enough at trying to create insight. Stories, and as I say, more of that this afternoon at 3:30. Stories work because stories are a universal software as human beings. They work because they simplify. A good story takes something quite complicated, quite deep, quite meaningful, and simplifies it into good and bad, characters and conflicts and quests. It translates information into emotion. Most stories actually are about things, about what sort of universe we live in. Are we an orphan? Who are our parents? Why do I seem to have this ability to do magic? Whatever it might be. So we do learn about the world through story, but it doesn't feel like we're learning. It doesn't feel like someone's teaching us. Why? Because it works at this level of emotion. It works at this level of empathy. We empathize with the story. We feel an emotional link with it. And then, only then, after that, do we suddenly take in the rational information, hopefully, that we're being told as well. What is storytelling? Particularly if you look at this singularity, if you look at the fear of machine learning and automation and AI, storytelling, I think, will still remain human beings' killer app. I still think it's the one thing that we can do at the moment that machines can't yet. And I'm not going to say never will, because I'm not entirely sure. But at the moment, it's still our own killer app, our own territory, our own special world. Why does it act simply? Because it offers a way for the brain to organize and simplify. And again, it goes back to the fact that stories do this because they are cognitively effortless. They're not cognitively burdensome. Daniel Kahneman, as I say, the guy who won the Nobel Prize for economics a few years ago as a psychologist, says that human beings are cognitive misers. Again, a bit of information. It is a fact. I have no problem with some facts. Here's a fact. The brain accounts for something like 1 to 2% of our body weight, but consumes between 20 and 30% of the energy that we take in, which is why the brain is a cognitive miser. It's why it's an ignoring machine. It's why we have to be careful of putting things into people's attention span. It's got to cut through that. And how does it cut through that? By being emotional, empathetic, telling a story. And stories work because they do at least these three things, conveniently beginning with C. They help human beings connect. That's what storytelling traditionally did in our tribal past, in our evolutionary history. People would sit around the campfire and share social information about where the animals are for eating, where the predators are, who's hunting us, who's good, who's bad in the group, in the tribe. Stories are clear. They're not cluttered with facts. They're not cluttered with diversions. They're not full of bullet points. And story works because it creates coherence. A good story has a beginning, middle, and an end. It joins up. Later this afternoon, I'll talk about The Golden Thread, which is the subtitle of my book, based on the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. And that's what a good story has, a thread that runs through. So the brain always knows where it is in that thread and in that story. Generally, PowerPoint, Prezi, whatever presentations I see, both from people I work with, I train, I lecture, just tend to be, as someone once said of history, one damn fact after another. That's not coherence. But above all, storytelling does one thing that reminds us of our essential humanity, which is that storytelling makes us care. And again, that's got to be a goal that everyone in this room wants for their products and their services and brands, for people to care about them as much as we do, or as you do. And I'm going to give you an example of this. This is a couple of years ago now, I think. And I always use this as an example, and if I could see you all, I'd just perhaps look at your faces and look at the emotions on those faces. Because this is a story. It's a terrible, tragic story. And it's beautifully, if that's not a distasteful way of looking at it, beautifully sort of designed and chosen by the photo editor and journalist. Because what you see is a child. You don't see the face, but you see the child. You see the grief on the soldier's face. And this is one person, one child, one story. And you cannot but feel emotions when you see that. That's the first thing you experience, the emotions. Sadness, anger, perhaps. Your body will feel these emotions. You'll probably feel, perhaps your spine will tingle or your hairs on your arms, back, or whatever will stand up. And then afterwards, then you'll start thinking rationally. How do I feel about the Syrian crisis, about refugees, about Brexit, whatever else it might be that is prompted by this image? But the first thing you do is you care. The second thing you feel is emotion. That's what I'm emphasizing. That's why stories work. Someone, and I think it wasn't necessarily the nicest human being on the planet, once said, a million deaths is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic. One death is a tragedy. And again, hopefully this illustration shows that point. And storytelling works because it is the original social medium. I don't know how many of you have sort of kids, teenage kids, whatever, social media, this, apps, that, whatever. But storytelling has always been and remains our social media. It's the way in which we channel information, and it is social. It's gossip. It's conversation. That's what storytelling is rooted in. And I worry, and this is why I'm going at length to talk about this, that in this age that we're just losing that in business. We're just losing that innate, universal, historic, evolutionary basis in storytelling. And again, I just want to throw this out, and I'm hoping this is going to provoke a few thoughts, ideally nothing more physical than that. I like this quote, the conversation is king. Yeah? Content is just something to talk about. I like that. And I think it's probably right. I think it's rooted in a truth that sometimes we get obsessed with the content, the stuff that we're talking about, but actually that's just a means to an end, and the end is conversation. I like that thought. So I might say this one again this afternoon. I'm going to give you another acronym which I've adapted from somebody else. So I'm going to ask you, when you're looking at, writing a proposal, a document, some sales material, when you're talking exhibitors today, perhaps, think about what you're saying. How much of what you are saying is true but useless? Most of what you're saying is not going to be wrong, is it? You know your products very well, better than me, better than anyone. That's not the point. Is it emotional? Is it engaging? Or is it going into attention span? Bear that in mind. If you learn nothing else from today, TBU. Is what I'm saying true but useless? And I'll give you one example, obviously a lot more this afternoon, about what storytelling is. These are just two facts that happen to be sort of linked. You add that and you have a story. So sometimes it's only a very small twist, a very small shift, the addition of something that creates an emotion. Because whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, your brain goes from that, which is nothing, to that which is it starts working at a storytelling level. It starts becoming emotionally involved. It wants to find out the answers. It wants to scratch that itch. So really what I'm saying is, how does this translate? It translates by saying, make me care about you, your company, your brand, your customer. So don't just think about how people think about what you're offering. How do they feel? I do an awful lot of market research and insight work, as I said, with clients. And I say, stop asking rational questions on feedback. Try to do something that's a bit more emotional. How do people feel? Involved, surprised, disappointed, confused. You're going to get a lot more learning by looking at people's emotions. Again, I'm emphasizing feelings over facts. Why? Because I'm saying I think our human disposition is to prioritize feelings before facts. Yes, we like to think, System 2 likes to think it's in control. System 2 likes to think, yeah, why did I buy that car, those shoes, that bag, that holiday? I did it because it was great value for money. Nah. Let's be honest. Most of the time, that's the bit that comes after. We buy it because we feel good. It makes us look good. It makes us look happy. So empathize feelings. If you frame it as a story, people are much more likely to care and feel involved. And as I've said, we tend as human beings to care more about people than we do about things. And I like to use this analogy as well. I think stories are patterns with meaning. Why do they work? Because they're patterns, and our brain is a pattern detection device. So again, in our evolutionary past, it was very important for us in the jungle or out in the wilderness. If our brain suddenly spots some weird stripes, are they just stripes, random nonsense, random noise, or is it a predator? So our brain's a very, very good pattern detection device. And stories work because they are a form of pattern. They are coherent. They're not just random bits of information, facts and data. And for me, meaning is one of the key things that human beings need. I often call human beings semivores. Carnivores consume meat, herbivores consume vegetables or grass or whatever. Semivores, human beings consume meaning. That's what we want in our lives. Meaning from family, friends, faith, football, other things that don't begin with an F. And I'm going to give you an example of how good our brains are at detecting patterns, okay? I don't know, how many of you had some of the croissants this morning? Do you have a croissant? Yeah? I know it's a strange question to ask, but it will become important. Okay, I want you to tell me now what you see in this picture. It's a picture of what? Sorry? It's a croissant, yeah, or a pastry, yeah? Anyone else seeing anything else in this? Because that's what it is. It's just a pastry. It's a face. Any specific bonus points? Sorry? Who? An ear? No, it's not the Trump ear. There was actually a picture of an ear, a dog's ear, as Donald Trump. It's a picture of who specifically? Mother Teresa. Brilliant, brilliant. It's Mother Teresa as a pastry. Okay? In the trade, this is called the nun bun. Why am I showing you this? Yeah? I love it when people go, oh yeah. Can we just do that again? Oh, yeah. Okay. No. Why am I showing this? Because our brain is very good at over-investing meaning in things. It's always looking for patterns and meaning, even when there's no meaning there. So if you try and create a story, you try and create a meaning for your brand, our brain is naturally just going to play with it. It's going to grasp it. It's going to get emotionally involved with it in a way that it won't with pure data or facts or information. Oh, I'm going to show you an ad now. I want to just show you, I don't know if there are any Norwegians in the room. Surprisingly not. I want to give you an example of what I think, a really sort of dull, commoditized category, low-cost airlines. I was doing an exercise trying to say, okay, how do you tell a story about a brand or a sector that is actually inherently very generic, commoditized, and perhaps rather dull? Because we all know what low-cost airlines are like. They tend to be full of claims and destinations and prices and bright, bold primary colours. And then I came across this ad from Norway for a Norwegian low-cost airline. And let's see, hopefully, if it will run now.
En gang til. En gang til, bare en gang til. En siste gang. Please! Bare en gang til.
Setting fire to our insides for fun. Collecting names of forever missing them. But I'm forever missing him.
En gang til. Så skal jeg ikke mase mer.
I don't know about you, I love that. I love that because it's the triumph of magic over logic. It's a story where perhaps you would never expect to see a story, but just facts and information. It's a grandfather and a grandson. It's about imagination. It's about charm. And as some of my Norwegian students said, it makes Norway look lovely as well. But it's a brilliant way, again, of just prioritizing the emotion, the storytelling nature of humanity, rather than emphasizing facts, repetition, messaging. And again, most of the people I show that to remember that again days, weeks after I've shown it to them. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So I mentioned that numbers numb us. What's the other half of my equation? Stories stir us. They stir emotions in us. That's what they do. That's why, as humanity, we place such an importance on storytelling. So one of the things I'm going to ask you just to sort of change your emphasis on, perhaps a little bit less about proving how great you are, proving how fantastic your products are, your benefits are, your services are. And maybe just shifting the dial a bit more, maybe a lot more, towards move. I'm not saying it's either or. I think ideally you do both. But my argument, hopefully if you buy it, is that we perhaps spend too much time on the first and nowhere near enough on the second. So where does this take me to? Where does this take me to in the last couple of slides? What is the new convergence? I want us to make sure that we avoid what I call the human deficit, that we forget the importance of ourselves as human beings. Let's heed the 3 E's. Let's make sure that everything we do, our brands, our communication, is full of emotion, empathy, and also effortlessness, making it easy for people to choose. This is really the secret of creativity. That's actually what creativity is about. If you've done that, you're creative. Worry less about selling, do a bit more telling. Embody, humanize, bring to life case histories. When you work with people, when people use your products, those are the stories. What did it do? How did people feel? What were the looks on their faces? Don't worry so much about facts and delivery of product benefits. If you do all of that, you'll make people care. And then you can create a culture of storytelling. Create stories about your users, about your user experiences. Find a place for them. Put them on the website. Make them live. Collate them, put them together. Celebrate them. And circulate them around the company or around social media. Again, more of this afternoon. And if I asked us what business we're in, I don't think we're just in the technology business. I think we're all in the effective persuasion business. Because technology is just ways of using stuff. For me, it's about how we communicate the technology that really makes this come alive. So for me, it's about effectiveness and persuasion, not just about efficiency and productivity. So for me, it's worrying less about the input. What is the stuff that we make? And worrying more about the output. How do we get people to feel about what we do? And this is what it is to make people care. You know, this is just a sort of thing that we're talking about. And then you've got the basis for doing all the things that I've been talking about for the last half an hour. I've not got time to talk about this, but we know from all the evidence, the psychology, that actually storytelling as a culture creates a more human or humane, happier company, culture, team and individuals. There's nothing that salespeople I work with like better than having an array of really good stories that they can tell. Because salespeople, when you let them do it, and marketing people as well, are just great storytellers. So I'm going to end up with what I think the new convergence is. And apologies again for a bit of classical Greek stuff, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. I introduce you to a Greek word. It's a Greek word, techne, which you probably know because it's the bit that comes at the beginning of technology. But the Greeks used techne as what they called embodied or practical knowledge. That's what techne meant for the Greeks. Techne was really skill, and as such, it was creative. It wasn't, in a sense, perhaps the way technology is becoming now. It was essentially a creative discipline. So for me, techne is also the art and craft of good communication. And that, I hope, has been what I've been trying to talk to you about for the last half an hour. But also we know that techne is not only the heart of technology, it's the heart of technique. So for me, it's about finding the right consumer communication techniques to make technology live, to make technology sing. So for me, technologies really are just communication techniques, and at the forefront of all of these communication techniques is storytelling. So that's my new convergence. To avoid this human deficit where we actually forget what makes us human, what makes us great, let's create this new union. Let's create this new convergence. And it is the convergence between technology and storytelling. As I said, I'm around again, I think, at 3:30. There will be some more tips and tricks. I'm around as well all the day if you want to ask me questions. I think that's all I've got time for now. Thank you very much.